So I've got to say that the new field test for the Envoy in Starfinder 2nd Edition really has me excited. I think Paizo did a lot of good things in this field test, but as an English teacher, I am going to have to take away a few points for excessive use of exclamation points in the document itself. Paizo, is this a class write-up or two guys arguing on the internet? Today, I'm going to talk about the recently released Envoy field test for Starfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller that can always be counted upon to lead by example when it comes to a buffet. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to a discussion of the recently released Envoy field test for Starfinder 2nd Edition. Now we know that later this year, Paizo is going to be doing a full playtest of Starfinder 2nd Edition, and in the lead up to that playtest, Paizo has been dropping some low-level field tests of different aspects of the game to give the community some early insight into the direction that Paizo is going to be going with Starfinder 2nd Edition. There's been a lot of interesting stuff that Paizo has mentioned already about Starfinder 2nd Edition, and if I'm being honest, I kind of feel sad that this is the first time I've really started talking about it. We've had some field tests for the Soldier, the Mystic, and a few of the ancestries inside of Starfinder 2nd Edition, but I haven't really covered any of that content, mostly because I've just been in a time crunch and I haven't had the opportunity to get around to it. But I had a little bit of extra time off work, and it happened to coincide with the Envoy field test dropping, so I figured I'd go ahead and talk about it. If you would like me to dive into some of the other Starfinder 2e content that Paizo has been teasing out so far, definitely let me know, and I can try to swing around to that, maybe when spring break happens at my school. Because I will say Starfinder 2e is something I am excited for, and I do feel like I'm behind the curve on that content. If it's something you want to see, I would be glad to cover it. So jump down to the comment section and definitely let me know what you think about this video and content like this. And don't forget to do all of that other YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe. You can check out my free Discord or my Patreon. All of those links are in the video description. But with all that out of the way, let's get started. So for those of you who are unaware, the field test documents that Paizo is dropping for Starfinder 2e are intended to be a partial look at different elements of Starfinder 2e, and we will get a whole view of what Paizo is doing when the full playtest happens later this year. For the class playtest, what Paizo is doing is they're essentially giving us levels 1 through 5 of classes inside of Starfinder 2e, so we can get an idea of the direction that Paizo is thinking for the various classes, but not necessarily a full list of everything that Paizo might do with the class. The Soldier and the Mystic have already been released, and the latest release is the Envoy class. And if you're interested in checking out the field test document for the Envoy, I will have a link to that in the video description. It's free, you can go download it and take a look at it for yourself. I'm not going to talk about everything in that document, and there's definitely a lot of fun stuff in there, so I would recommend reading it for yourself. And I will say that when the Envoy field test was dropped, it was something I almost immediately jumped on because I was very interested in it. In Starfinder 1st Edition, Envoy always felt like one of the weaker classes for me because it really struggled to have an identity that set it apart from other classes inside the game. I honestly hate to say this, but in Starfinder 1st Edition, every concept that I had for an Envoy could be accomplished just as effectively by either an operative or mystic build, and the Envoy just never really stood out to me, and I always felt like that was a detriment to the class. But if I'm being honest, the Envoy's playstyle, which might be called something like a diplomat in another gaming system, is a playstyle that I think is hard to nail down mechanically. I've seen a lot of takes on this character concept over the years, and I've even tried a lot of takes on this character concept, and I'm not saying that I hated everything that was put out there, but I have very rarely seen this executed in a way that just felt really strong or really engaging at the playing table. So I was excited to see what Paizo was going to come up with for Starfinder 2nd Edition, and I have to say, the field test is really impressive on the Envoy. Almost every complaint I had about the 1st edition version of this class has been addressed already in the field test, and I absolutely love it. Let's go over a couple of basics real quick. Starfinder 2nd Edition is going to use the same core mechanics as Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There will obviously be some differences in the game due to things like setting, but overall the core mechanics of the game are the same. So if you understand Pathfinder 2e mechanics, you can look at Starfinder 2e field test and get a pretty healthy glimpse at where Paizo is going. The Envoy, rather predictably, is going to be a charisma-based class that is going to focus very heavily on skills. Now, this is technically the same as Starfinder 1st Edition, but one of the problems with Starfinder 1st Edition is where the Envoy was a charisma class that did skills, the operative class just did skills better. Paizo addresses in the field test for 2e that the operative is not going to have the ridiculous array of skills that they did in 1st edition, really allowing the skill aspect of the Envoy to shine through. And another thing that Paizo is doing with the Envoy in Starfinder 2e is they're giving the Envoy the ability to switch out skill feats from day to day on the basis of what the Envoy needs. That's honestly an option I don't think I've seen yet in Pathfinder 2e. I think it's very creative and gives Envoys a pretty solid niche in the skill side of the game, so that's already something I really like. However, if we step back and look at the big picture of the Envoy is a charisma-based class that leans very heavily into skills because they are the teamwork class. My friend Drew over at Team Player Gaming, I expect is going to have a field day when he sees this field test, and I'm looking forward to his video. I think he's going to have a lot to say about it. But the Envoy is definitely intended in Starfinder 2e to be the leadership-focused class, and you can tell in the abilities that they've given this class that they are really leading into the leadership side of gameplay very heavily. And I want to note here that when I say the leadership side of gameplay, I don't just mean the party face side of gameplay. While those two things often go hand in hand, Paizo has actually made an effective distinction with the Starfinder 2e Envoy that they are focused on leadership and can do the face stuff if they need to. Honestly, that's pretty intelligent game design. If I had to give my overall thoughts on how I think the Envoy is ultimately going to play, at least as it stands right now, the Envoy feels like an interesting mixture of the Bard and the Investigator. And if I'm being honest, I didn't realize how much I needed a class like this to exist inside of the 2e mechanics. And speaking of mechanics, this is really one of the major things that I was looking for in the field test. One of the big problems with the Envoy in Starfinder 1st Edition is they never really felt like they had a mechanical identity. They never really had one thing that truly felt like it belonged to the Envoy and the Envoy alone, but I feel like Paizo's done a pretty good job of that here. First up, the Envoy comes with an ability called Size Up that they can use once per hour to, well, size up a target. Now, the amount of time necessary to use Size Up is going to vary a bit depending upon how your Envoy is sizing up a target. You can do it in person or over the infosphere, for example. But essentially, you spend some time sizing up your target, getting a read on them, and then you get a number of small mechanical bonuses that you gain when you are acting against that particular target. This is similar to the investigator's ability to pursue a lead in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but rather than pursuing a lead, you are targeting a specific person, and that person becomes known as an asset for your envoy. So, while it's similar to the investigator, there is some distinction in what the envoy is doing here, and it comes with a pretty healthy spy movie feel, if you will. So I really enjoy the take that Paizo is offering here. But the envoy gets to turn a particular target into an asset, and then they have numerous small advantages when they're acting against that asset. As an example, all envoys get an ability called Saw It Coming, which they can use as a free action when they roll initiative if their asset is part of the combat. Essentially, it's going to allow the envoy to react a little bit faster, and they're going to get to draw a weapon, stride, or step for free as part of that initiative roll. However, as much fun as the size up ability is, the real golden star of the field test, and this is kind of the main thing that Paizo shows off, there's a new class of abilities that envoys can obtain called directives. And by the way, Paizo, gold star for the perfect choice of terminology for a sci-fi game. Directive is on point, I love it. All envoys will start with a directive called Get 'em, and then there are numerous other directives that envoys can unlock by essentially taking class feats. Every directive has the visual trait, and there are some optional rules for using the auditory trait with directives instead. But essentially, you give a command to your allies, and so long as your allies are following your commands, they're going to get some kind of boon or bonus as a result. As I said, every envoy is going to start with the Get 'em ability, and essentially they just point out a particular target, and if their allies are attacking that particular target, that target will have a -1 penalty to their armor class. Pretty useful. However, the extra oomph that Paizo added to the directives ability, and this is what really sold the field test to me, that is, every directive comes with an option that allows the envoy to lead by example. Basically, after the envoy gives a directive, if the envoy then does whatever it is they've told their allies to do, they improve the bonuses of that directive. So, going back to the Get 'em example, by pointing out an enemy, the envoy debuffs the target's armor class, but if the envoy then actually attacks the target themselves, they give a damage buff to themselves and their allies against that target. This is going to create some very interesting tactical options in Starfinder 2e, as it allows the envoy to either double down on a particular tactic, or possibly buff a certain tactic for his allies while the envoy handles something else on the battlefield. There are a couple of different ways you can go with directive abilities, and I think that's going to lead to some interesting choices, so I love what Paizo has done here. The final major thing that got partially spoiled in the Envoy field test is the new Envoy subclasses known as leadership styles. And again, this is a major improvement from 1st edition to 2nd edition. The 1st edition Envoy really didn't have any subclass options, meaning that every Envoy was just kind of choosing from the same pool of options, and it made building an Envoy feel very samey in 1st edition. So the idea that they've added subclasses to the Envoy is a solid improvement in my mind. The leadership styles that are described in the Envoy field test, if I had to give them a comparison, feel like slightly upgraded bard muses to me. We didn't see much in the way of class feat support for specific leadership styles, though I do suspect that that will be coming down the road. But at a quick glance, I do think the Bard Muse comparison is probably the easiest to make. There are 7 leadership styles that are presented, and each leadership style at first level is going to give your envoy training in one specific skill, and then one leadership style perk. And when you hear that phrase, leadership style perk, basically what you need to read is bonus, general, or skill feat. That's basically what's going on here. So at first level, your leadership style is going to round out your skill selection, and then each leadership style lists several acts of leadership that the leader can take at 6th level, and we don't know much beyond that. The field test stops at 5th level, so the acts of leadership is definitely a teaser for things to come. All of the acts listed represent actions that you can already take in the game. There's nothing unique in there, at least nothing that I saw. So it seems like the Envoy, when they take certain actions, are going to get some kind of bonus on top of those actions, but right now we don't know what that bonus is going to look like. It looks like the leadership style is going to represent some skill buffs at first level, and then some buffs to certain actions at higher levels, which I think makes for some interesting choices. The 7 leadership styles that are presented in the field test are From the Front, From the Shadows, Guns Blazing, In the Spotlight, Hotshot, Infosphere Director, and Through Desperate Times. From the Front is going to give you training in the athletics skill and give your Envoy some better armor progression. From the Shadows is going to give you training in the stealth skill and is going to reinforce stealth abilities for your Envoy. Guns Blazing is pretty self-descriptive, but I'll go ahead and tell you it gives you training in acrobatics. In the Spotlight is the performance-based leadership style, and I feel like that one's going to go social media influencer route. That could be an interesting twist on the Envoy class. The Hotshot Envoy is honestly one I'm very excited for because this is the piloting focused version of the Envoy, and anyone who watches this channel knows I love some vehicle combat, so a vehicle combat option is something I definitely want to see. The Infosphere Director gives you training in the computer skill and represents someone who leads via technology. And then finally, Through Desperate Times may be one of the most interesting from a roleplay perspective, representing a character who stood up at a desperate moment and sort of earned their leadership chops in the middle of some kind of crisis. This is going to give you training in medicine and have a lot of keeping your allies together kind of abilities. It's something I think has a lot of room for some really fantastic roleplay. And those are several of the highlights that I saw in the Envoy field test for Starfinder 2nd Edition, so the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about Starfinder 2nd Edition, about the field test that we're seeing? What are your thoughts about the Envoy class in 1st Edition or 2nd Edition? Do you like the direction that Paizo is going with the Envoy for this field test? Jump down to the comment section and let me know your thoughts. I am definitely very excited by what I've seen of the Envoy in this field test. A lot of the things that I think held the Envoy back in Starfinder 1st Edition have been addressed, and have been addressed in what I think are just some very creative ways. Don't get me wrong, the Starfinder and the Mystic had some interesting stuff, but the Envoy field test really has me excited for some of the stuff that Paizo is doing with Starfinder 2e, and I can't wait for the full playtest to drop because I definitely think I'm going to have some fun with that. So be sure to let me know what you think, and I guess remember to do all of that other YouTube stuff as well. Like, share, subscribe, check out Discord and Patreon. All of those links are in the video description. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.